Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel, continuing the Swamp Thing read-along with Swamp Thing number 36. This is part 2 and the concluding issue of the Nukeface Papers story arc. We went over issue 35 last week, so if you haven't watched that episode, you're going to want to do that because you'll be completely lost without it. As I mentioned in that previous video, this is probably my favorite Swamp Thing storyline, honestly. That might change in this read-along. I'm about to enter American Gothic, which is a classic, so we'll see how that how that affects my opinion. But I do love this two-issue story arc. I think it's extremely strong thematically, as well as from a creative standpoint. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First off, the cover is fantastic. Stephen Bissette knows how to compose a great cover. He very frequently uses these directional devices and compositions to center focal points in the page. The triangle here centering the silhouette of Nukeface, and the extreme foreground focal point of Swamp Thing's desiccated skeleton, because he was in bad shape when we last saw him. Nukeface put his hands on him and basically just started melting holes directly through Swamp Thing's body. Swamp Thing doubled over in pain, couldn't get up, and he's just been rotting on the ground since then. So we open up the Nukeface Papers Part 2, Alan Moore writing, Stephen Bissette on pencils, John Totleben on inks, and we get more of those newspapers, that newspaper visual motif from the previous issue, as Swamp Thing is just vaporizing under the radioactive touch of Nukeface. I love to read Swamp Thing's narration because it's always so well written, so I'll go ahead and I'll do that here. Eventually, the poisonous creature leaves to search for more of the effluent that sustains him. I do not see him again. I cannot lift my head far enough to see the gradually deepening hole in my chest, but I can feel it. A cold ache surrounded by blue numbness. Throughout the long, paralyzed night, my mind is caught in a gauze of delirium. I see a landscape whose hard edges have eroded, and new and disturbing forms. I think of Abby. I left her sleeping when I came here to think to this place of my destruction. Inside my mind, I call her name. She does not answer. She does not come to find me. All night, I am awake inside the rotting prison of my body. With the first light of dawn, I notice that my arm is gone. The day presses slowly. During the afternoon, a hole appears in my stomach. Soon my lower half will be detached. As it starts to decay, my head fills with ice-blue nothingness. My consciousness is not centered in my brain, and I could survive for a while without a head. But after that, fear wells up inside me, and again I call my lover's name. There is a brief picture, Abby at Elysium Lawns, a child showing her his picture of Santa Claus, almost too proud to speak. The image dissolves, melting into the blue silence that engulfs me. Did I make contact? Did Abby hear me? As dusk falls, I become blind in one eye. In the distance, I hear someone, a man, crashing through the twilight. He shouts, "Why don't you leave me alone?" his voice frightened. Soon I hear him stumbling away. Later, I imagine I hear a woman praying very softly. Later still, the sound of many people calling to each other. I no longer exist from the waist down. So Swamp Thing's laying there. He's hearing all these noises in the night. He's tried to reach out to Abby, like almost telepathically, just to send her a vision of him there to come find him. And eventually she does. She does find his body, and she's obviously terrified of what she sees. I like that we established that she's looking at him with a flashlight, and I kind of think of this panel layout as a flashlight beam. I just think that, I think maybe I'm reading too much into that. But I think that kind of works. And I love their juxtaposition of their two faces, one eye visible, the mouth and teeth agape. And he says he tells her what he plans to do, and then my lower jaw falls off, and after a while, I die. So Swamp Thing's dead. And now we go into the town. And this is a non-linear issue. We are going to be seeing the same events from different characters' perspectives at different points in time. So we start with a police officer who has found the body, or someone has found the body of Not Ed from the previous issue, and he's tracked down Not Ed's landlady, who kicked him out. She's the reason that he was sleeping in the woods, because she kicked him out. They had a fight, and Wallace from the company, who was in Pennsylvania, hears them talking, and he hears that a wino has gone missing, and that is familiar to him because that's what happened in Pennsylvania. Was Nukeface became like an urban legend, and vagrants went missing. So he hears about that, and now he's on edge. Later in the day, he goes to the police station. He's ranting about how there's a monster on the loose, and his wife's missing, and they have to find him. And in that search, they find the body of Bob. I was wrong. I was mistaken here. They're not talking about finding the body of Not Ed. Not Ed is missing, and so the police have been called to look for him. So apologies for that. But after that, we cut to Wallace, and Wallace is now reunited with his wife Treasure, and we start off with him, a close-up, sweating. He's found her, and everyone has found her, and they're backing away from her. And we don't know yet what's happened. And then we get another further flashback of him overhearing the conversation between the police officer and Mrs. Morrill, I think her name is, about Not Ed, Bob, being missing. And from there, we see Wallace kind of freaking out on some local kids because they're playing a game where they've got this kid with a bag on his head and they're calling him Nukeface. And so he screams at them to stop. He goes back to the motel, and he's not himself. He takes a walk. Treasure asks him to go pick up some milk while he's out. And he gets lost in the swamps, but he eventually finds his way out of the woods. And Treasure has left a note for him. She didn't know where he was, so she went out looking for him. She got her own milk. And that's when he goes to the police station to tell them that his wife's missing. They got to go look for her. And they do eventually find her, and we get a little foreshadowing here of the glowing footprints, which we know when Nukeface takes a step, it leaves a glowing blue footprint behind. And we get her extreme foreground silhouette and the group kind of coming towards her. They found her, and he asks where she's been, and then she tells him, and he gets this worried look on his face, and then everyone starts backing away from her instantly. And I love this kind of acting here where she's happy to see him. He is freaked out by what she tells him, and we have close up, and now wide shot of everybody backing away. The beats there are really, really, the shots chosen are really smart. And then he starts to run away, and he's facing a different direction than he previously was, so we know he's running away from her. And he says he's never going to stop running. We cut now to Mrs. Morrill, the landlady who's identifying Bob's body. And this is something that John Totleben, I think, is really great at. And he's been doing this throughout the entire series, where he's using ink to create an image that's almost like ethereal or like wispy, like barely even there, like almost transparent. He's done it time and time again, and that's really hard to do because ink is so like present and permanent. So when you put ink down on a page, it immediately gives something an extreme form. So to use ink to create the sense of no form is just really impressive. It's really hard to do. And Mrs. Morrill is identifying his body, and she's talking about how, they had a fight, but she says, I always insisted he keep himself clean. And she says it must be that fella from Pennsylvania, the one who ran off screaming about his wife. That girl's in the hospital now. I suspected him from the start. Now my Bob's gone. Although you understand, he was just my tenant, a paying tenant, whatever those old spinsters say. He owed back rent. And then she drops the act a little bit. We get no panel borders here, just this white space as she cries on the officer's shoulder. He was obviously a lot more to her than just a tenant. And then she says, "Oh God, I threw him out." And so it is her fault that he was sleeping in the woods that night. And we get more newspaper from that talks about toxic waste and all that. And we're seeing Treasure Monroe Wallace's wife, and we're seeing the same scene as before, where everybody finds her and she tells Wallace where she's been. And now we get a close up of her face, and she's crying. And Stephen Bissette gets to, who notoriously could be late on a deadline, gets to save some time a little bit using the exact same 2 panels over there. So I'm sure he really appreciated getting to use a little bit of a shortcut, but the difference is in the face of him being scared and sweating and her not understanding and crying. Just really great mirror image pages of each other. It even has like the same kind of end panel where he's walking with the bag and she's walking away with the bag. And she explains that she got tired of waiting. She went out and bought the milk herself, and she found this man lying in the swamp. And it's Nukeface. He's surrounded by the newspapers. He's got the glow all around him. And really fun play with the insects here. She's walking through a bunch of fireflies who also have a glow around them. And so it mirrors Nukeface laying there. And she's a good Christian woman, and she thinks, what would Jesus do? So she takes her jacket off. She lays it on top of this obviously sick man, and she lies down next to him to try to keep him warm. And she says a prayer for him out loud. It's the prayer that Swamp Thing says that he thinks he heard earlier. So we're getting that folded back in here. And then she wanders back out, and that's when everybody finds her. And it's another great shot selection where it's the wide shot, everyone converging on her. It's the close-up where they're reunited. Then the moment where she explains what she's done, the hands come off, he starts to back up, then what we pull out, everybody starts to back up, they form a ring around her, and now we're even further back, and everyone's backing up even further. And Reese's Pieces really, they stick with the alien ads. I guess E.T., I mean, it was 3 years prior that E.T. had come out, but I guess they went with what works. And then ultimately we get a splash page of her just kneeling on the ground and him running away and everybody freaking out. Then we get these kids. So it was mentioned earlier by Wallace that he yelled at some kids for acting like Nukeface and saying that name over and over again. And this kid, Billy, is telling the story of where they came up with that. And he was fishing and he saw Nukeface, and, wouldn't you know it, he came up with the perfect nickname for him. It's the one that even the kids in Pennsylvania called him. So that's where he got the idea for the mask. That's where he got the name from. And now he's saying, this guy who yelled at me, now his wife's in the hospital, and they say she's going to have a screwed up baby. And she said that the Nukeface guy was dead, but they haven't found a body yet. So who knows? And we see the mask here made of another newspaper with that toxic waste, a newspaper article about toxic waste. And that's where the cover for the previous issue kind of came in from, with the newspaper in the face. So planning ahead a little bit in their imagery. Then we go over to Abby, who wakes up from her dream. Swamp Thing's not there. She's got to go to work. She's not too worried. But as she's working, one of her students shows her a picture, and while he's showing her a picture, she gets this image of Swamp Thing, and that's, again, it's what he's talking about here. We get that, we had that foreshadowing earlier. And so when she's done with work, she goes out looking for Swamp Thing, and there's the flashlight beam of her finding his body, and he explains to her that what's happened. We get that fruit plopping around him again, just like in the previous issue. where nature is just decaying around everything that Nukeface touches. And he explains that he's going to try to leave his body, send his mind out into the green, and he's going to try to build a new body. And if it works, I'll see you soon. But if it doesn't, I love you. And right after that, the jaw falls off and he completely disintegrates, and nothing is left but that blue glow as more newspaper headlines blow in the wind. Nukeface is where we end up. He wakes up and he is trying to remember where he is. He remembers, oh yeah, they buried my stash under in the water in the swamp. So I have to find some more. I'm almost out of juice. And he talks about how he stumbled across this kid who was fishing, and they started making fun of him. And he and then again, what does Swamp Thing say? Why don't you leave me alone? So that's what Swamp Thing's hearing in that first page, and that in the beginning there. Nukeface is also remembering that Treasure came to visit him, and she said a prayer over him, and he says that was a nice dream. But now it's time to move on. He's got to go in search of more waste so that he can drink. He says, I don't care if I got to look in every state, every town, every street, damn it. It's there, boy. I know it's there. Perseverance and determination. That's all it takes. Heads up, America. Here I come. And we end with this incredible spread of pasted up newspaper headlines and articles about toxic waste and radioactivity as Nukeface walks into it. And a quick note about all of these newspaper clippings and all of the ones we've been seeing throughout the past 2 issues. Stephen Bissette, in his introduction for Volume 3 of this collected series, writes that these are real newspaper articles that he pulled from just his local hometown, that he pulled in just the span of time that he worked on these issues for about 2 months. So he didn't have to even look too far for them, because there was a lot of nuclear news out there, a lot of news about toxic waste stuff that was just really readily available for him, which is sad. That is the conclusion of the Nukeface papers. Next up is Growth Patterns, which is a very, very important issue because it introduces John Constantine. It's his first appearance in comics. So, yeah, I love the Nukeface papers. It's an excellent cautionary tale. It's obviously Alan Moore talking about the dangers of just America's handling of the environment and our energy. I actually do think, nowadays, nuclear power is actually supposed to be a pretty good alternative because now we know how to handle it better. But certainly in terms of dumping toxic waste, it's something that is still a big problem and still rings true now. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on this 2-issue arc. Let me know if there's anything that I missed. Let me know in the comments. Thank you for spending some time with me today. But now it's time to get back to reading.